I've been secretly running a lifestyle Instagram account for 3 years where I portray a completely different personality. And my mom follows me without knowing it's her own daughter constantly criticizing everything I post. But what I didn't know was that she was about to discover something that would destroy our family in the most unimaginable way. But I'm getting ahead of myself because you need to understand how I ended up in this nightmare situation, where my own mother became my biggest online enemy without realizing she was attacking her own child. I'm Sarah, 22 years old, from a strict conservative Christian family in small-town Ohio. My mother, Linda, works as a church secretary and has very specific ideas about how young women should behave. Growing up, I was the perfect daughter on the surface. Church every Sunday, modest clothes, excellent grades. But inside, I was suffocating. When I left for Ohio State University, I finally felt free to explore who I really was. That's when I discovered my passion for fashion, makeup, and lifestyle content. But I knew using my real name would be a disaster if anyone from home found my account. So I created Stella Monroe, a completely different identity. I told everyone I was a fashion student from California living in New York with artist parents who encouraged creative expression. Everything my real family wasn't. The transformation was total. At home, I was quiet and reserved. As Stella, I was confident and outspoken. I used heavy contouring, wigs, and colored contacts that made me unrecognizable. My content celebrated everything my mother preached against: self-expression over modesty, individuality over conformity. Within months, Stella had thousands of followers and brand deals. I was supporting myself through college without my parents' help, living this secret double life that felt more authentic than anything I'd ever experienced. But what I didn't realize was that social media algorithms work in mysterious ways, and mine was about to betray me in the worst possible way. During my junior year, my mother called me, more agitated than I'd ever heard her. She told me she'd discovered the most disgusting and shameful Instagram account in her suggested content. As she described it, my blood ran cold. She was talking about Stella Monroe. She had found my secret identity and was absolutely horrified. But here's the thing that made this situation a complete nightmare. She had no idea Stella was her own daughter. My mother spent that entire phone call telling me about this terrible young woman who represented everything wrong with modern society. She said Stella's makeup was painted on like a Jezebel, her clothes were attention-seeking, and her content promoted vanity and materialism. Then, she said something that made my stomach drop. "Thank God you were raised with proper values and would never embarrass our family by behaving like that Monroe girl." She had just spent an hour hate-scrolling her own daughter's Instagram account. But that was just the beginning of my nightmare, because what my mother decided to do next would turn my life into a living hell. She told me she was going to follow Stella's account to keep an eye on the content corrupting young women. She appointed herself as a moral watchdog, and I became her primary target. What happened next was psychological torture beyond anything I could have imagined. The comments started immediately. Under every single post I made as Stella, my mother would leave brutal criticism. But these weren't just negative comments. They were personal attacks that cut straight to my soul. "This is exactly what's wrong with your generation. Thank God, my daughter was raised with proper values and would never embarrass our family like this. I feel so sorry for your parents. They must be heartbroken to see what their daughter has become. You should be ashamed of yourself." But the comment that broke me completely was this one: "Your poor family must cry themselves to sleep wondering where they went wrong with you." The irony was devastating. My own mother was cyberbullying me without knowing it, using me as an example of everything she was grateful her real daughter wasn't. She would literally call me to praise me for not being like myself. But what made this psychological torture even worse was what she started doing with my content behind the scenes. She would screenshot my posts and share them in church WhatsApp groups as examples of social media corruption. She'd call me after seeing a particularly bold post and say, "Sarah, I'm so proud you're not like this terrible girl I follow online, who's everything I'm grateful you're not." She was describing my authentic self as morally reprehensible, while praising me to my face for not being me. For months, I lived in this surreal nightmare where my own mother was my biggest hater online and my biggest supporter in real life. But I had no idea that the worst was yet to come. The breaking point came when I posted content about breaking free from toxic family expectations. I was processing my own trauma through Stella's posts, but I couldn't have predicted how my mother would react. She left a comment that would change everything. Your poor parents probably cry themselves to sleep every night, wondering where they went wrong. You're a disgrace to your family and an embarrassment to every young woman who looks up to you. That comment went viral among my followers for all the wrong reasons. Hundreds of people attacked her for the cruelty. They found her profile, discovered she was a church secretary, and began calling her out by name for cyberbullying. But what happened next would expose my secret in the most dramatic way possible. My mother was completely unprepared for the backlash. She called me in tears about being persecuted for standing up for Christian values, by defending morality against that Monroe girl's corrupting influence. I had to comfort my own mother while she cried about being attacked for cyberbullying me. But while I was dealing with my mother's meltdown, someone else was putting together pieces of a puzzle that would destroy my secret forever. One of my followers had been watching the drama with my mother's comments for months. They were fascinated by this woman's obsessive hatred of Stella Monroe and decided to investigate who Stella really was. They noticed location inconsistencies in my posts and began reverse searching images. They saw similarities between backgrounds in my New York content and Ohio locations. They analyzed every detail of my posts with the dedication of a detective. But what they found would shock everyone. The breakthrough came when they spotted something I never thought anyone would notice. In one of Stella's Instagram posts, I was wearing a vintage necklace. In my personal Facebook photos, the account my family knew about, I was wearing the exact same piece of jewelry. It was a unique vintage piece from my grandmother that was unmistakably identical. This follower had just connected Sarah Williams to Stella Monroe. But they didn't stop there. They created something that would make my family drama go viral around the world. They put together a detailed Twitter thread with side-by-side photos, location analysis, and the smoking gun evidence of the matching jewelry. The thread was titled, "The Most Insane Family Drama You've Ever Seen. A conservative mother has been cyberbullying her own daughter for months without knowing it." But I had no idea this was happening until it was too late. The thread went viral immediately. Thousands of retweets, hundreds of thousands of views. People were fascinated by the detective work and shocked by the revelation that a conservative mother had been unknowingly cyberbullying her own daughter. But what made my situation go from bad to catastrophic was what someone did with that viral thread. Someone tagged my mother's church and my father's workplace in the Twitter thread, explaining the full situation. Within hours, everyone in my hometown was sharing the story of Linda Williams, the church secretary who had been attacking her own daughter online. My mother found out when her pastor called asking if she knew she'd become the subject of a viral internet story that was being shared around the world. The phone call I received that evening changed everything. She was furious, humiliated, confused, and heartbroken all at once. She demanded to know how long I'd been living this double life and accused me of deliberately setting her up to look foolish in front of the entire world. But instead of reflecting on why I'd felt the need to create a secret identity, she did something that completely shattered our relationship. She doubled down on her criticism. She said, "Discovering my deception proved she was right about social media corrupting young people." The fact that I'd deceived her so completely showed I'd been corrupted by worldly influences and lost touch with proper values. Then she gave me an ultimatum that forced me to make an impossible choice. She demanded I delete Stella Monroe immediately and issue a public apology to our family and church for the embarrassment I'd caused. She wanted me to confess that I'd been living in sin and ask for forgiveness from everyone who had been affected by the scandal. When I refused and tried to explain that Stella represented my authentic self, the person I'd always been inside but had never been allowed to express, She said something that broke my heart completely. She told me I was no longer welcome in their home until I repented and returned to the values they had raised me with. My father called separately with news that made the situation even more complicated. He admitted he was embarrassed by how cruel my mother had been to someone she thought was a stranger. Learning that her target had been her own daughter had forced him to confront some uncomfortable truths about his wife's behavior. But he also told me something that changed my perspective on everything that had happened. He said he had actually seen some of my mother's comments on Stella's posts over the months, and he had tried to talk to her about how harsh she was being. But she had insisted that someone needed to stand up to the influences corrupting young people. The viral story continued to spread for weeks. News outlets picked it up, social media commentary channels analyzed it, and it became a case study in online harassment and family dysfunction. Some people used it as an example of generational conflicts and the pressure young people feel to hide their authentic selves from conservative families. Others focused on the irony and humor, creating memes about parents who don't recognize their own children online. My follower count skyrocketed as people became interested in the story behind Stella Monroe. Brands reached out with collaboration opportunities, and I was invited to speak at events about authenticity and family relationships. But despite the professional opportunities that came from the viral exposure, the personal cost was devastating. My relationship with my mother remained fractured for months. She struggled to reconcile the daughter she thought she knew with the person I actually was. She would alternate between demanding I abandon my online presence and grudgingly acknowledging that some of my content was well-produced and thoughtful. But the most difficult part was watching her slowly realize what she had actually been doing all those months. Every harsh thing she had said about Stella, calling me vain, shallow, morally corrupt, had been directed at her own child. She had to confront the fact that her criticism hadn't been about protecting Christian values. It had been about attacking someone who was different from her expectations. The breakthrough in our relationship came 6 months after the viral exposure, but it wasn't the fairy tale reconciliation that people expected. My mother finally called to apologize, but the conversation was complicated and painful. She admitted she had been wrong about attacking a stranger online, and she acknowledged that my authentic self wasn't something to be ashamed of. She could see in my content how much happier and more confident I had become when I was allowed to be myself. But the apology came with conditions and expectations that showed how much work we still had to do. She asked if I would help create content about generational differences and family communication, wanting to turn our painful experience into something positive that could help other families. It was a surprising proposal from someone who had spent months attacking everything Stella Monroe represented, but it also felt like an opportunity to turn our trauma into something meaningful. We started collaborating on content about family relationships, but the process was more difficult than either of us expected. Today, my mother is supportive of my career, though she still occasionally leaves comments that make me cringe. The difference is that now she knows she's commenting on her own daughter's content, and her remarks come from a place of love rather than judgment. But our relationship will never be the same as it was before this happened. There's still tension during family visits. She still struggles with some of my content. I still feel guarded about sharing certain parts of my life with her. Some wounds don't heal completely, and some trust, once broken, remains fragile. The experience taught both of us that family relationships are messier and more complicated than social media stories usually suggest. The mother who spent months cyberbullying her daughter became supportive, but that transformation wasn't instant or complete. We're both different people now, changed by the experience in ways that can't be undone. We're both more thoughtful about our online interactions and more honest in our offline relationships. My content now includes discussions about family dynamics, authenticity, and the complicated reality of loving people who struggle to accept your true self. But what I've learned is that sometimes the people who are meant to love us most are also the ones who have the hardest time seeing us clearly. especially when who we really are challenges their expectations. And sometimes, even when they come to understand and accept us, the damage from their initial rejection leaves permanent scars that change the relationship forever. The viral story of my family drama has become more than just internet entertainment. It's become a reminder that behind every online persona is a real person with real feelings, and that the comments we leave on strangers' content have the power to cause genuine harm or healing. My mother's journey from my biggest critic to my supporter wasn't a perfect redemption story. It was messy, painful, and incomplete. But it was real, which made it more meaningful than any fairy tale ending could have been. The irony that haunts me most is that the woman who attacked me for being inauthentic online was the same person who had forced me to be inauthentic offline for years. Sometimes the people who claim to want what's best for us are actually the ones preventing us from becoming who we're meant to be. My Instagram account has evolved beyond fashion and lifestyle content to include honest discussions about family relationships, the courage required to live authentically, and the complicated reality of healing from family trauma. The story of Stella Monroe and her unwitting critic became more than just viral internet drama. It became a case study in how families can damage each other through good intentions, how online harassment affects real people, and how healing from family trauma is possible but never perfect. What started as my secret escape from a controlling family became the catalyst for forcing honesty into our relationships. My mother had to confront her own capacity for cruelty. I had to face the consequences of deception, and we both had to learn that love sometimes requires accepting people you don't fully understand. The most important lesson wasn't about social media or family dynamics. It was about the courage required to be authentic in a world that often punishes honesty, and the patience needed to help the people you love understand why being yourself is worth the risk of their disapproval. Today, when my mother comments on my posts, I know she's supporting her daughter rather than attacking a stranger. But I also know that if I hadn't been exposed by that Twitter thread, she'd probably still be leaving hateful comments on Stella's content, never knowing she was cyberbullying her own child. That thought haunts me more than anything else about this entire experience. How many other families are destroying each other through screens, attacking the people they love without realizing it, creating wounds that might never fully heal? My story went viral because of its shocking irony, but the real story is quieter and sadder. A mother and daughter who spent years failing to see each other clearly, and who are still learning how to love each other despite the damage they've caused. The internet loves dramatic revelations and neat resolutions, but real family relationships are far more complicated than that. Sometimes, the biggest victories look like small moments of understanding, and sometimes healing means accepting that some things will always be a little broken. But even broken relationships can still be beautiful, and even imperfect love can still be worth fighting for. Don't forget to subscribe to Viral Family Tales for more incredible stories about family secrets and complicated relationships. We share new content every single day, so hit that notification bell to never miss an upload. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and comment below with your own experiences of family members struggling to accept your authentic self. Your engagement helps us reach more people who might need to hear these stories. And remember that being true to yourself is always worth it, even when the journey is more difficult and complicated than you expected.